Good day, everyone, and welcome to the Resistance Bureau, where my colleagues and I shine a light on the enduring struggles for freedom, the campaigns against government oppression, and the oft undercovered issues that we believe deserve broader attention, both in Africa and worldwide. This includes, of course, the 2-year anniversary on July 26th of the military coup in Niger and the unlawful detention of that country's democratically elected president, Mohamed Bazoum, who, along with his wife, have been held hostages by military authorities since that time. I'm joined today by two special guests who know the situation and its dire consequences better than anyone. First, we have with us Ambassador Karim Soumana, who served as Niger's ambassador to Qatar and was a key member of Niger's UN Security Council team during the country's elected membership from 2020 to 2021. Reed Brody is also joining me. He's an acclaimed international lawyer, activist, and author who has been working very closely on the legal issues surrounding President Bazoum's arbitrary detention. Thank you both so much for joining me today and for helping to inform our global audience on this important issue. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
Of
Thanks, Jeff.
Ambassador Soumana, I'd really like to start with you. And if you could, in short, tell us what transpired 2 years ago today in Niger and what have been the broader implications for Nigerian citizens writ large.
Thank you very much, Jeffrey. And let me first start by thanking you and thanking also Metro Brody for all you have done for Niger and for President Bazoum and basically his team. And I think that it showed that around the world people are rallying around this cause. And as you mentioned, it was a shock 2 years ago, July 26th, to everybody. I think that one of the sentences that everybody used to qualify Niger was an island of peace in a whole region of turmoil and chaos. And on all the fronts, for 2 years, President Bazoum has been working on the interior front, appeasing everybody. He's been meeting with the opposition leaders, civil society. He's been implementing anti-corruption measures. He's been working for education, especially education of the young girls. There was a whole development plan that had just been adopted for the next 5 years. Everything was going according to what he promised the Nigerian people. On the international front, Niger was basically making more and more allies. Niger's voice was being heard. Our plan for counterterrorism, our plan for economic development, our plan for democracy, anti-corruption, good governance were seen as models. As you have seen how many dignitaries have visited Niger during those 2 years. We have also seen a discretion of the terrorist attack. It was minimal and that's even in compared to our neighbors and all. So everything was functioning well. So nobody understood what happened on July 26th. It just everybody woke up with a shock. And the initial reaction was, okay, here we go again. It's probably a mutiny of the presidential guard who wanted basically different things. And so let's talk because it happened, it happened in the past before in Niger. We are accustomed to those things, which is not good, but certainly we are accustomed to them from the opposition, from civil society, from the government. Everybody unanimously was in support of President Bazoum. Everybody. So the first hours, I mean, some people that today you see are basically the staunchest supporter of the junta were the one who were basically saying that this is not right, and they were lending support to President Bazoum and to his government and to his regime. As the hours passed by, what seemed to be a mutiny kind of turned into some negotiations, some protracted negotiations, and by the nightfall, it turned into a full-blown coup. And and well, everybody was shocked. Of course, everybody was like, "Why?" That's the first question everybody was asking themselves. Why a coup at this moment? It was literally so unwelcome. It was literally such. I mean, nobody understood it. And even the speech that the military head, the junta head, did was literally seen by everybody as like none of the grievances he used to justify the coup were during Bazoum's tenure. None of them. None of them was during his tenure. So Of course, the machine went on, the other part of the military joined in. They I don't want to say reluctantly because I think that everybody had a choice at that moment. Everybody had a choice to stand up for democracy, to stand up for what's right. But they made the choice to join in at the coup. And and then basically by the next day, it was basically a full-blown coup where they had suspended the constitution. The usual thing. They suspend the constitution, everything is dissolved, no manifestation, nothing. The difference is, and this is why I think people need to understand that this is not a coup. This is, and if you want to call it a coup, we should call it the first disinformation coup, the first social media coup. That's the machine that destroyed everything. That's what happened. The lies, then the lie machine start working. Then they start trying to find a justification. Then we need to do this. Then President Bazoum was doing this. He was negotiating with terrorists. Any sort of lie that they could find, the bigger, the better. Then, basically, as usual, the algorithm did its job. A bunch of young people who didn't understand literally what was going on went on the streets and thinking that it was a coup when even the military, none of them actually believe it was a coup. So that's what happened. And only in the capital city have you seen this manifestation. Have you seen, those people coming out? They were getting rallied. Oh, Niger is going to be attacked by ECOWAS, by France, by this and that. When all this is part of the ECOWAS protocol. Niger signed all those documents where if there is a coup, ECOWAS can take sanctions, ECOWAS can take measures and all those things. Then the disinformation machine went further. France, 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 France. These, basically the foreigners are trying to do that and all those things. Couple of weeks later, couple of months later, well, everybody finally accepted the coup reluctantly, and I still reluctantly call it a coup. I call it a kidnapping. And the ransom was let us ransack the country, get rich, and then when we leave, you know, whatever happens to the next guy, that's not our problem. Because 2 years after, if you look at it, nothing happened. There's no plan. There's no economic plan. There's no development plan. So, and I was trying to explain to some people who didn't understand Niger, and they're asking me, well, I saw on social media. I was like, let me explain to you something. It's like you go to a store, a computer store, then you lock the owner of the store. You steal the computer. But when you steal the computer, which was Bazoum's program for Niger and basically Niger, you only take the charger. You forget to take the charger. Then you cut the internet, which was the international community. So no international community, no internet. And all you do, you put the computer in front of you, you turn it on, and then all you see is those landscape, and then you see the clock, and then you see, the time. But the battery is going down. The antivirus expired. So the virus, which are the terrorists, which are economic, basically a failed state economically, the basically all the sectors, education, healthcare, everything going down. That is the antivirus that went off. You have no solution. You're just sitting and watching the computer, watching the battery go down, watching the viruses take over. And every time somebody tells you, free the owner who literally can fix this, you say, no, that's not the solution. I just want to watch the computer. Sooner or later, the battery will go down, the virus will take over, and the entire country will collapse. And I think by year 3, we are there right now. I'm going to stop here, I think.
Thank you. No, I appreciate that lengthy metaphor that you use. I think it's really useful for those who might be trying to wrap their heads around this situation. But as you mentioned, it's been 2 years. I mean, that's a long time. What is and Reed, feel free to jump in here as well. What is the incentive to keep him, and let's remember his wife, detained arbitrarily, unlawfully? What is the incentive for the junta to do so? And perhaps maybe the better question is, what do they fear? How are we still here 2 years on in this same situation?
Well, I mean, he is being held, he and his wife, again, the democratically elected president, Mohamed Bazoum, and his wife have been held in the presidential compound for the last 2 years. They have been held in virtual isolation. Uh, they have no access. They haven't seen the light of day for 2 years. They have no access to their friends, their supporters, their family, even their lawyers. In the first few months, I was talking to President Bazoum quite regularly on the telephone. Then they took his telephone away.
And when did
Um,
that happen, Reed? That was October
that was
2023.
October, I believe it was exactly October 19th, 2023.
Okay.
They said basically they accused him, accused is an approximate word because he's never been charged or tried. And I think that's an important thing. But he is, to answer your original question, he is being held as a bargaining chip, as a human shield, right? In the early days after the coup, there was a talk, as the ambassador said, about an intervention by ECOWAS to reverse the coup. The Minister of Interior got on television and said, if ECOWAS comes in to our country to save President Bazoum, they may find his cadaver. So basically, he's there to protect as a human shield. He's there as a bargaining chip. The country, as the ambassador mentioned, has been going downhill in terms of economics, particularly in terms of the fight against the jihadists. And they're desperate. They need money. Um, and it's been said that they've asked for 500 million, excuse me, $500 million to release President Bazoum. As his lawyers, we have gone to court. We went to the ECOWAS Court of Justice, which ruled that he was being detained arbitrarily and ordered his release. The junta did not abide. We went to the United Nations Working Group on Arbitrary Detention, which also ruled that his detention was arbitrary and asked for him to be released. They haven't abided. So we can only speculate that they're holding him as I said, as a hostage, a bargaining chip, and as a human shield.
Thank you for that, Reed. And Ambassador, what are your thoughts on that? I read a really interesting article by a Nigerian activist this week, and the crux of his argument was that the junta fears President Bazoum's democratic legitimacy, right? He was democratically elected. He was the representative of the first truly peaceful democratic transfer of power in the country's history. Is that really what they fear, or is it simple self-centered, self-preservation? Is it the money issue that Reed Brody has mentioned, or is it something else altogether? Are we missing something here?
Thank you again. And I think Meta Brody is right on many of
Okay.
the front. And I just want to add on what he is saying. I think that they push it too far. They it was a joke that went too far, even though it's not a joke. It went too far. They thought that we have a bargaining tool, we have a human shield, and they all became hostage of it. Because let's not basically forget this. You have a CNSP, you have a
That's
government.
the junta. The CNSP is
Yeah.
the junta.
All those people ended up becoming also hostages of this whole charade. Because I dare any of them today to get up and say, I want to leave of my own volition. And we will see if he's not going to end up like President Bazoum. And I think that everybody at this point is just trying to find an out, but nobody knows how to do it. And President Bazoum, if at the beginning the disinformation machine did its job and portrayed him as the worst of the worst, he was trying, but a lie can take you so far. And now, when we see the reality, 2 years of power from those people, everybody start having, second thought and nostalgia. And now rather than basically condemning him, everybody is calling for his release because they're like, this guy has nothing to do with this situation and we want his release. And in terms of legitimacy, I want to add this. If you think you are legitimate, if you think you are popular, take your military clothes, resign from the military, and go for elections. We shall see. Go against President Bazoum. We shall see if you're going to win the elections.
Yeah.
That's as simple as that. We have seen it in the history of Niger. We have seen a military who did the coup, who resigned from the military and went for election. And we have seen his score. We have seen it in other countries. Nigeria, President Buhari, he came back later on as a democratically elected president. So if you think you are legitimate and you're so popular, release him and let the best win in
Right.
fair and free elections.
Right. Um, Ambassador, you mentioned, this growing chorus of individuals, some of them very high profile internationally, increasingly speaking out, calling for the unconditional immediate release of President Bazoum. Just today, the Platform for African Democrats, for example, issued a statement led by former Botswana President Ian Khama and signed by several dozen, pro-democracy leaders across the continent and globally. Previously, upwards of 40, I believe, former heads of state worldwide from every continent have signed on to a letter demanding that he be released unconditionally and immediately. What sort of impact, if any, do these international calls for his freedom have um, on this particular situation? And Reed, I love your thoughts on this too. But Ambassador, what would you say? Being a diplomat and having been there and traveled in these circles, does this sort of international advocacy have any effect on the ground that you've seen to date?
Yes, it has a tremendous effect. And I think that we just have to look at the Niger's diplomacy nowadays. You have to compare the 2 years of the junta and the 2 years of President Bazoum. During the 2 years of President Bazoum, the number of requests, the number of invitations to come to different panels, to come to different meetings, to come everywhere around the world, and the number of dignitaries that came to visit Niger because Niger was on the right track is incredible. Today, Niger is absent. They literally live in darkness. They literally is, as I said, it's like you unplug the internet. The internet is an international community. You unplugged it, and that's what they did. And all they can do is literally looking for people who have the same disinformation machine as them because they have nothing to offer, nothing else to offer, because they don't know themselves how to get out of this situation. And these growing calls, they're just going to grow louder and louder. And everybody thought that after a couple of months, that's it. People will forget about him. Nobody will forget about him because everybody knows the risk of forgetting him that he can do to democracy and that he can do to other nations. Because let's not forget that the whole region is fragile. The whole region is fragile. And Bazoum is not only a symbol, but he was the hope that, okay, we can transfer power peacefully. Democracy can live on good governance, anti-corruption, also the right measures against terrorism, because those counter-terrorism measures were working. So I think the calls are just going to go louder. They're not going to stop now, and they have a tremendous effect.
Yeah, and I
You
think,
know,
oh,
Jeff, when you talk about all the people who come out to support Bazoum, all the
yeah,
former heads of state, it's very interesting. When I was approached by a friend of President Bazoum's to be one of his lawyers, I really hesitated. As you know, Jeff, I'm working against presidents, against heads of state. And I started talking to people and because I did not know President Bazoum, and whether it was journalists or diplomats or UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, everybody, almost to a person, really said this man, was a Democrat at heart, a reformer. The ambassador talked about his work on behalf of women and girls in education. Um, and when, of course, there's the coup in Niger, followed coups in other countries, in Mali and Burkina Faso, and was seen in a geopolitical sense, like these were people trying to kick off France or whatever. And That's not usually the side, either the side that I'm on. But as the ambassador said, sometimes a coup is just a coup. It's not. This has nothing to do about France or Russia. President Bazoum was trying to bring some order into the petroleum industry in Niger. He was about to fire the head of the Presidential Guard. And so people who had a vested interest, economic interest in making money off minerals and making money off of petroleum sector. People did this, and a lot of people believe that the former president, Yusufu, who had handed over power, was getting a little antsy because of all the reforms that President Bazoum was putting into place. And so I think, this is a lot of people around the world saw in Bazoum and see in President. But look, the man could apparently, I mean, I know diplomats who have talked to the Niger junta and said, will you release him? And they said, no, because he will not resign. This is a man, and when I talked to him on the phone those early days in captivity, he said, I am not resigning. I was the democratically elected president of Niger. And I think we have to, the other people, some of the other presidents who were overthrown in these coups, that, they resigned right away. They got exiled. President Bazoum and his wife have stood up for democracy.
Yeah, I think you both raise two really interesting or various interesting points here, but two of which stuck out to me. Ambassador, you were speaking about sort of the regional cohesion behind President Bazoum during his tenure, and I think perhaps that's why you have seen leaders in Nigeria, for example, the former African Union chair, for example, the number of former presidents from the region, from Cote d'Ivoire, from CAR, from Mali, down further south in Botswana and Mauritius, all these former presidents and current leaders speaking out, advocating for his release. And Reed, to your point, I think it's really interesting that you mentioned your journey here. To me, I've been really struck this week, for example, the press statement that Human Rights Watch released and some of the reporting that Amnesty International has done. Two traditional stalwarts in our human rights community who are often on the side, of course, on human rights defenders, civil society. And I've never in my memory recall either organization really speaking out so forcefully on behalf of a head of state. Typically, as you said, Reed, we're on the other side, working with human rights activists and pro-democracy opposition leaders. So it's been really interesting to see that cohesion around these calls for his release. And I think just to close out, Reed, I wanted to ask you, you mentioned a lot of these legal avenues that you've been working on over the course of the past 2 years. What's next on your plate in regards to that? Is there any follow-up to do at the UN Working Group? Is there any follow-up, for example, at the ECOWAS Community Court? What steps are left, if anything?
Well, we've taken the major ones. The working group has asked Niger to follow up. So this is the UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention, 5 members from all 5 regions of the world who determined that the detention was arbitrary in violation of international law. And they've asked, I mean, they asked in their decision for Niger to follow up. We are going to go to the African Court of Human Rights. We're going to use every avenue here. Obviously, the junta doesn't care, and so unless the Security Council of the UN, unless somebody can oblige them, it's not going to happen. So we've got the law on our side. We've won all the legal cases. I think now, as this program is contributing to showing that just people should not forget that a democratically elected president, a man, a reformist who committed no crime, is being held without charge, without trial, a man who's the democratic hope for his country.
Thank you, Reed. I appreciate that. And for me, just to follow up on that really quickly before Ambassador, we close out with you. What's been really disappointing for me is that many of President Bazoum's staunchest allies have really remained a bit silent, and their calls for his release have become ritualistic at best and really sparse. I'm speaking of, being an American, my own government under successive administrations here. But I think we should expect some statements in the coming days from powerful leaders in Washington that'll hopefully have an impact on the ground and on this situation. And with that said, Ambassador Soumana, I want to try to leave on a positive note. You heard Reed mention, possibly going to the UN Security Council, and given your work there, is that a potential avenue? And what gives you hope for a resolution going forward? If there's anything to sort of hang our hats on the end of today, what can we look for down the road, and what gives you positivity as you look ahead?
Okay. Let me first also mention what I've been thoroughly disappointed with, just like you, the civil society of Niger and the women's organization. Bazoum's wife has been a staunch supporter of the woman cause. Bazoum has been a staunch supporter of women, women's education particularly. Today, no woman organization in Niger has made a statement for the release of his wife. None. The civil
It's very
society here,
difficult for people to speak out given the in Niger, given the repression against lawyers, against human rights activists, against civil society. I mean, people are taking a big chance.
Yeah, I wonder if
I,
that's
I, totally,
a
I,
self-preservation tactic. Yeah,
but I totally understand that, and I can attest because look, some of my family members are paying the price currently.
right.
But what I'm trying to say is that rather they participated in this. They were complicit in this. A lot of the staunch supporter of the junta were civil society people that Bazoum has received in the palace, that Bazoum has worked with, that Bazoum's wife has worked with. And today, they are the staunchest supporters of this junta. They're in the government places. They are the one who are basically parading all this conspiracy theory. They are the one who are genuinely pushing the junta to take measures, coercive measure against anybody who dare to tell the truth. And that's where my disappointment coming from. If you're neutral, I can understand because it's self-preservation. But rather, if you participate in this, some of them have been financed by some people like who were head of Tournon Lapage and all that. They've been financed basically by other organizations in the US, in Europe. They have had award for democracy and all. And they are today the one who are bearing democracy and who are contributing to what we're going through. And in regards to the Security Council, I wish I can say something positive, but my fear when we were at the council, and this is the fear of many of African nations when you go on the council, is to be careful not to create a mechanism that would open the door tomorrow for your country to be on the council agenda. So all our work was to make sure that no other African countries come on the council agenda. However, with the dire situation that we're seeing today, the Sahel might be the first, basically, caliphate in Africa. Literally, that's what might happen. Those three countries are literally run over by terrorists. And sooner or later, the international communities, everybody has to sit and see that this is not the way to go. And we might have to have a resolution to end this. We might have to have what they were screaming against, oh, sovereignty, sovereignty, sovereignty. Well, they might end up on the council agenda where the council will dictate the rules because of the security situation. And I think it's so dire that in the next coming month, if there's no solution to this, or if the junta doesn't start sitting and understanding that when people tell the truth, they're not against the junta, but rather they are trying to save the country. And part of the solution is the freeing of President Bazoum and basically sitting at the table so everybody can talk. This country is going to basically be one failed state.
Thank you so much for that analysis. And I think it's also important before we close to mention that And you just reminded me of this, Ambassador, that, President Bazoum's arbitrary, unlawful detention is not an isolated incident, right? You and Reed have spoken eloquently about the deteriorating human rights situation and the grave violations of civil rights and political liberties in the country. The fact that, perhaps the most well-known human rights defender in the country, Musa Changari, has been arbitrarily detained himself for a number of months now. There are a number of independent journalists behind bars. Our friends at the Committee to Protect Journalists and Reporters Without Borders have been really good at advocating for their release. So this isn't just an isolated incident, right? And it speaks to both of your points about how since July 2023, we've seen a rapid deterioration, not only in the economy, but also in the political and human rights spheres as well. So it's important to keep that in mind as well too when people are looking at this. And in addition to the security situation, which you spoke eloquently about. So thank you, both so much for taking the time to be with me here today. I can speak on behalf of my entire team at the Resistance Bureau to say that we appreciate the vital work you are doing on this and many other fronts. And to learn more and to stay updated on the Free Bazoum campaign, you can visit freebazoum.com. You can get involved in the campaign there, join the thousands of others worldwide, most of them from Niger, who have signed the petition demanding his immediate and unconditional release. On that website, you will also find many news articles, op-eds, press statements, and letters of support for President Bazoum that have been published over the past 2 years, including today, from the Associated Press, from AFP, from Radio France International, and a number of other international media outlets. So I definitely encourage you all to check that out, to get involved if you can. And in the meantime, everyone take good care, stay safe, and keep fighting the good fight. And thank you both again for joining me. I appreciate it.